Welcome to the StoryADay podcast. This is Julie Duffy from StoryADay.org, encouraging you to be a writer every day, not someday. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. Julie here from the StoryADay podcast. By the time you are listening to this, the StoryADay Critique Week for October for the fall of 2022 is underway. I hope that you're in it. If you're not, and if you missed out, come on over, follow the links in the description and get on the wait list for the next time. That'll be in February, because right now people are uploading stories and feeling nervous and starting to go in and get their assignments and read everybody else's stories. And I always have such a wonderful time during Critique Week listening to all the feedback and the recognition of other writers' works that everybody in the group gives, as well as the questions, the probing, useful questions that they share. It's a really generous and supportive exercise. And if you can find people that you trust and that you get good feedback from, hold on to them. If you don't have any of those people in your life, get on the waiting list for our Critique Week for next time. Okay, so as I record this, as you listen to this, we'll be heading into the last couple of weeks of October. And that means, of course, in the writing world, the last couple of weeks of October, of course, for all you people who love a challenge, means that NaNoWriMo is fast approaching. Are you participating in National Novel Writers Month this year? Will you be writing a full novel from scratch? Are you prepping right now in Preptober, as they call it? I'm curious to hear from you, so come follow the links in the description and leave me a comment. Let me know what you're planning. I know some people in the StoryADay Superstars group who are participating. I know some people who are doing it in a rebellious way. They're going to just use the energy of the challenge, which is totally fine. Use the energy of the challenge to revise other things that they've got going on, work through a revision of a novel, revise some stories they've worked on. I know some other people who are starting from scratch. They've been planning since September or August. They've been, planning out the next novel that they want to write, which is very exciting. So are you doing that? Are you participating? Are you a rebel? I have a creative challenge workbook that I put together. So if you weren't thinking about doing NaNoWriMo before now, or you haven't done any prep at all, there's a link to that workbook in the notes as well, so that you can get that. And it just sort of helps you think about what your goals are, what your purpose for taking part in this is, because it's tiring and it's an emotional roller coaster doing a challenge, especially a month-long challenge. Trust me, I know a little about this. It's an emotional roller coaster, and doing some prep work beforehand, not saying you need to outline your novel. The journey of discovery is a wonderful thing, but some prep work at the beginning can really help you get through the whole month if you're clear on what your goals are for the challenge. If you're clear on what you consider a win, if you've thought through what you're going to do when you don't live up to that day's goals, or maybe you've fallen behind for the week. What's your contingency plan? What's your backup plan? What's your minimum that you can achieve without destroying yourself? Do you need to get to the end of the story? Or are you going to just be fine if you write the 50,000 words, which is a lot of words? For myself, I would, having done it a few times, I would highly recommend trying to get to the end of the story, no matter how sketchily you get there. I like to use the Save the Cat book Save the Cat writes a novel, and that methodology I find really helpful because it divides the story into quarters. There's kind of the opening to the sort of no turning back point where the character has decided to go. And then there's the two sections in the middle, which are the fun and games, as Blake Snyder called it. And then so you can divide those up into the weeks during November, and you can give yourself a little breathing room to, you know, like take a couple of extra days, because there are more than 4 weeks in November. So you can plan to do part 1 in week 1 and part 2 in week 2, and have a little breathing room. But the thing that I really like about the Save the Cat structure and beat sheets is that it doesn't just tell you what's, you know, now your character should be doing these kinds of things, and, you know, now they should have a crisis and stuff like that. It sort of, it tells you what the audience should be experiencing at that point too. And you can start to see it, that pattern, when you watch movies. I've got my husband doing this now, where, you know, he'll now, he used to get annoyed about it, but now he's on board. Now he'll pause a movie and we'll look at where the timeline is, and he'll be like, "Oh, look, halfway through everything changes." And like I've ruined films for him, and I have apologized for that. But the story structure that's in there, especially in modern Hollywood stories, it really follows. That's where Blake Snyder's beat sheets came from. So, and it holds up for commercial fiction. You want to write a commercial fiction book, write it like a movie. It's got to have those beats. It's got to allow the reader to experience certain things at certain times. And that's what's in those books that I found particularly useful, much more useful than people talking about rising action or climax or resolution and things like that. So if you're looking for a story structure model to get you through a month of writing a novel, I'm going to highly recommend those. I also recommend Dan Wells, his 7-point story structure. If you are interested in outlining but not outlining, I think that's a really useful one. You can find him talking about it on YouTube. And what I find particularly interesting about that is that he thinks about the events of the plot in terms of where the character is going relative to their desire. Are they getting closer to it? Are they getting further away from it? And he actually has a really interesting way of thinking through those beats before you even write a word. And he doesn't do it in order. And I am always a fan of people who don't make me do things in order, like the logical ABC order. He does point 1, then point 7, then he does point 5 or something like that. 3 maybe. But anyway, it doesn't, you know, I think when we hear the word outline, we tend to think of those essays that you guys were taught to write in school if you were in an American school system. They've got a very, very, for those of you who aren't in the American school system, they've got this really rigid way of teaching how to write an essay over here, which is probably quite useful. And I probably wouldn't, you know, it would have been a little less stressful when I got to university and had to figure it out for myself if I'd known this. But it also kind of grinds everybody down, because it's like point 1, point 1A, point 1A, 1, you know, it's a very rigid structure, and it puts people off outlining. And for something as living and breathing as a novel, you can't really jam it into that kind of outline. But for something as big as a novel, it becomes really difficult to write it if you don't have some sense of the structure, unless you're just willing to rewrite it and rewrite it and rewrite it 14 times, which I'm not, because I'm lazy. So I don't have that kind of attention span. I don't want to spend 14 years on the same novel. So I'm always looking for story structure hacks and for people to uncover the structure beneath things. That's why I made my short story framework, to help you not have to write the same short story for a year. I mean, you can if you're really working on and tweaking a story, but like if you just want to write a draft of a story, there are some structural bones in our culture and all cultures around storytelling. So anyway, back to the point. NaNoWriMo, if you're looking for story structures, the two I really like that made a lot of sense to me are the Save the Cat books, Dan Wells' 7-point story structure. And if you're writing romance, there's a little thin little book, which probably started out as a blog post, that's just me speculating, but it's called by Gwen Hernandez, and it's called Romancing the Beat. And it appeals to me in part because it's full of 80s music references. So she's probably about my age, and it's kind of fun. And it's not super clear to me all the time exactly what she's talking about, but it's so short and compact that I can sort of I can layer it over other story structures that I've read and worked on, and see what I need to be doing in terms of a romance. So there you go. That's what I would recommend for people who are thinking about writing a novel for NaNoWriMo, who don't necessarily want to outline. If you want to do some different prep, I have that workbook that I'm going to link to in the show notes, which will take you through the ideas behind the whole challenge. Like, why are you doing it? What are your goals? What are your wins? And how are you going to handle the ups and downs of it? And it's helpful to lay that stuff out when you're still excited at the beginning and you're still, this is going to be great, right? You're still in that phase. Everything's going to work out. And then by about week 3, you may not be feeling quite so enthused about the whole idea. So you pull this workbook out again and you look at it and you're like, oh yeah, I really did want to do this because I wanted to prove to myself that I can get to the end of a novel. Or I really wanted to prove to myself that I could write 10,000 words a week or 15,000 words a week. Because if I can do that, then I can focus on the quality. But you can't really focus on the quality before you've got some quantity going, or you'll just end up writing and rewriting the same 2 paragraphs, which is something we have probably all been through. We've all been in that phase, right, where we have a couple of paragraphs, the opening of a story, a couple of chapters of a novel, and we have spent so much time reworking them and trying to make them right because we don't quite know where to go next, and we don't have the confidence to keep moving. Because writing first drafts is really hard. It's really hard to write imperfectly. It's really hard to feel that gap between where you are and where you want to be. It's a no man's land. It's uncomfortable. It's just not as much fun as we think writing should be, but it is something that we need to learn to do. So maybe that's what you write in the workbook, that your goal for NaNoWriMo is to get comfortable with the discomfort of writing imperfect first drafts. And I would absolutely salute you if that's your goal, because nothing else is going to get done unless you can find a way to get comfortable with the discomfort of writing a first draft, because every project is a first draft at some point. Every project is imperfect. Every project has a moment where you think, I can't make this work. And then you keep working on it, and all of a sudden you can. Maybe you show it to people and they ask you intelligent questions and it unlocks what was stuck for you. Or maybe you just keep writing. Maybe you write all the way to the end of the story and then realize why that bit at 1/3 of the way through the manuscript wasn't working properly, because you've got to the end now and realized that bit was centering on the wrong character, or a character who didn't even need to be there. So use the workbook if you want to get that, and use it to figure out what you want to get out of this challenge if you're taking part in it. Figure out what you'll do if you decide it's not for you partway through. I'll have some thoughts on that in the next podcast. And then, refer back to this workbook when you're in the midst of a hard slog, and just borrow some of that enthusiasm and energy from a couple of weeks beforehand when everything seemed possible. Because everything will come round again. You will feel like everything's possible again. You should never give up or try and give up, because if you're listening to this podcast, you're clearly a creative person who wants to write. And no matter how long you try and give up writing for, you're going to come back to it. It just, I don't really, I just don't think you can ever get rid of that urge. So you might as well just keep working on it. Even if it's while you're out for a walk or driving in a car, talk to yourself, tell stories to yourself. I used to tell stories to my toddlers on walks to stop them from whining. I was talking in the car on the way home today, working out ideas for a story. Just, wherever you can, be working on your writing because you're a writer. And you can try and deny it, but I don't believe you. I think you're a writer, and I think you should admit it, get comfortable with it. And getting comfortable with it means getting comfortable with the fact that we have to write stuff that is imperfect. And we have to have the humility to just let it come out. And we have to have the courage to know that we can revise it and make it better. And that's what I have for you this week. I hope this has been helpful. I will put a link for that workbook in the notes. Also remember that if you want to sign up for my Story a Week newsletter, that comes out every week with a short story writing prompt and writing lesson. And you can use them to write brand new stories. But if you're in the middle of writing a novel or trying a challenge like NaNoWriMo, these writing prompts and lessons can actually spark stuff that will help with the novel too. I wrote during the StoryADay May one year, I wrote a 100-word story as an exercise, and I took one of the characters from my novel and I just wrote this little 100-word story. And I looked at it, and because it was so condensed, I had to make it really, it forced me to write something that was really emotional. And when I looked at it afterwards, I suddenly realized that scene needs to be in the novel. And it had so much emotion built into it. I had sort of simmered it down, condensed it down into this rich sauce of 100 words. I was able to then take that and expand it out into a scene. And that was the scene in the novel that everyone commented on. So if you're interested in getting the Story a Week newsletter to just give you one of those prompts every week, and I also give you a little lesson how to think about the prompts, an aspect of writing to think about. You don't have to work on them every week, but it's really nice to have that check-in coming into your inbox every week. So if you want that, you can sign up in the links in the chat, as in the description as well. That's what I have for you this week. Happy writing, and yay, here we go. Thanks for listening. Why not come over to the blog at storyaday.org and check out this week's writing prompts and articles. And in the meantime, have a great creative week, and of course, keep writing.